Kratos didn't become peaceful, he became more dangerous, because now he knows when to stop. He didn't heal, he didn't find forgiveness, and he didn't leave the monster behind. Kratos is still dangerous, still capable of ending gods, still carrying the same violence that once destroyed everything he loved. The difference is this: now he knows it. And instead of unleashing that monster on the world, he cages it. Not because he's afraid of what he'll do, but because he's afraid of what his son might become if he doesn't. This isn't a story about redemption, it's a story about restraint. About what happens when survival tactics stop being safe, and when a man realizes that the greatest legacy he can leave behind isn't strength, it's control. This is Disassembled Heroes and Villains, and today we look at Kratos, not as a god of war, but as a father learning what must end with him. Before Kratos was a father, before he was a god, he was a Spartan raised in the Agoge, where boys were taught to survive or be discarded. Kratos was not born angry, he was trained. In Sparta, violence wasn't debated or justified, pain wasn't symbolic, strength wasn't something you discovered later in life. It was demanded immediately, through blood, discipline, and survival. Rage didn't enter his life as chaos. It sharpened him when fear would have slowed him down. It kept him moving when doubt would have stopped him cold. Rage reduced the world to something simple: win. And in a place like Sparta, simplicity was an advantage. This is the part of Kratos' story people rush past. They want the gods, the spectacle of destruction. But before any of that, rage was just a solution to the environment that shaped him. When Kratos stood before Ares, defeated, surrounded, and desperate, he didn't ask for wisdom, he asked for victory. Ares didn't create something new that day, he recognized something useful. A soldier already forged by violence, a weapon that didn't hesitate when others would. Ares didn't invent Kratos' rage, he amplified it, and then he aimed it. Under Ares' command, Kratos became the god's most effective instrument, sent to burn villages, crush armies, and erase opposition without mercy, until one night, in the middle of that obedience, he crossed a line he didn't know existed. Tricked by illusion, blinded by bloodlust, Kratos slaughtered everyone in a village temple, including his wife and his daughter. Not in a moment of madness, but while doing exactly what he had been trained to do. That's when Kratos' rage reaches boiling point, because in a single act, everything collapsed. His strength didn't protect what mattered, his loyalty didn't spare the innocent, and the tool that had always kept him alive became the thing that destroyed his life. The ashes of his family were bound to his skin, a reminder that the world takes, that love creates vulnerability, and that power, once handed over, will always collect a price. Rage gave his grief direction, it turned unbearable guilt into motion, into war against gods instead of a reckoning with himself. It allowed him to believe that if he destroyed enough monsters, enough temples, enough worlds, the pain might eventually quiet. This is where Kratos' rage becomes dangerous to misunderstand. It wasn't random, it wasn't uncontrolled, it was purposeful. Rage kept him moving when stopping would have meant facing what he'd done. It kept him upright when reflection would have crushed him. And for a long time, that was enough. But rage doesn't just answer pain, it replaces it. And when rage becomes the only way you know how to survive, everything else, love, restraint, patience, starts to feel like a threat. For Kratos, rage didn't just help him survive the loss of his family, it ensured he would never truly escape it, and that's where the cycle begins. Because survival tools don't come with an off switch, they don't tell you when the war is over, they don't tell you when the enemy has changed, they don't ask if it's right, they only ask one thing: does this still work? And for Kratos, for longer than it should have, it did. For a long time, rage answered every question Kratos was asked. It kept him alive, it gave him direction, it gave his pain somewhere to go. But survival tools are only meant to solve one kind of problem. And the moment the problem changes, the tool doesn't. Rage doesn't warn you when its usefulness is ending. It doesn't tell you the war is over. It doesn't announce that the threat has shifted. It just keeps pushing forward, asking the same question it always has: does this still work? For Kratos, the answer stayed yes longer than it should have. He turned that rage outward, first towards Ares, then towards Olympus itself. And for a time, it did work. The gods fell, the cities burned, the old world cracked under the weight of his revenge. But notice what never changed. When Ares was dead, his family was still gone. When Zeus fell, the guilt remained. When Olympus lay in ruins, the weight didn't lift. Kratos didn't destroy the gods because it brought peace. He destroyed them because annihilation filled the space where his family used to be. Rage had already solved the problem of helplessness. Now it was being asked to solve something else. Grief. Shame. The knowledge that nothing he could break would undo what he had done. And Rage was never built for that. It could end gods, but it could not rebuild a life. So the damage spread. Every victory demanded more force than the last. Every solution left more behind it to rot. Because Rage doesn't distinguish between enemies and obstacles. It treats everything in front of it the same way. And eventually, that path becomes your entire world. Kratos didn't lose control. That's the easy explanation. He stayed disciplined. He stayed deliberate. He stayed effective. But effectiveness has a cost when it's never questioned. When the sun itself went dark, it wasn't because Kratos was reckless. It was because Rage had narrowed its vision to a single direction. Forward. No room for restraint. No space for reflection. Just momentum. And this momentum, driven by Rage, becomes destruction by default. This is the quiet danger of survival tools. They don't fail loudly. They succeed for too long. They keep doing their job long after the moment they require them has passed. And the damage doesn't arrive all at once. It accumulates. By the time the heavens were torn down, Kratos wasn't free. He was alone. He wasn't punished. He was boxed in. Still alive, still dangerous, and still angry. Rage carried Kratos through war. It carried him through revenge. It carried him through the end of the world. But when there was nothing left to destroy, his anger had nowhere to go. So Kratos did something he had never done before. He stopped moving forward. The most important change in Kratos' life wasn't the gods he stopped fighting. It was the goal he stopped chasing. For the first time, Kratos wasn't trying to destroy the world. He was trying to disappear inside it. The Norse lands are quieter than Greece, colder, heavier. Not because they're safer, but because Kratos forces a simpler life onto himself. Isolation. A cabin at the edge of the world. A life reduced to routine. Hunt, train, survive. Not to conquer, not to avenge, just to endure his final years. This is where people get that story wrong. They say Kratos has changed because he's calmer, because he's quieter, because he's restrained. But he hasn't. The anger is still there. It hasn't faded, it hasn't healed, it's been buried. Every word is measured, every movement controlled, not because Kratos trusts himself, but because he doesn't. This is the man who knows exactly what he's capable of when he stops paying attention. So he watches himself constantly. He speaks less, moves slower, chooses nothing unless he has to. To the outside world, it looks like peace. But internally, it's probation. He's living carefully, because now there's something new in the cabin. Not an enemy, not a god, a witness. Atreus doesn't arrive as a symbol of hope. He arrives as a test. A child watching everything, learning from silence as much as instruction. And that terrifies Kratos more than Olympus ever did. Because rage doesn't just destroy enemies. It reframes how you see the world. Kratos understands this instinctively. He knows violence doesn't need to be explained to be inherited. It only needs to be modeled. And that's why the restraint is so severe, why the rules are so rigid, why emotion is treated like something dangerous, something that could slip. Because Kratos isn't afraid of failing himself. He's afraid of teaching Atreus the wrong lesson. This is the shift that changes everything. Before, anger was pointed outward. Now, it has to be contained inward. Before, the cost of failure was his own life. Now, the cost is someone else's future. Kratos doesn't stop being dangerous. He becomes deliberate. He doesn't abandon rage, cages it. Not because he believes he's earned forgiveness, but because he knows exactly what happens when a child grows up watching a monster believe he's justified. And that's where the story truly begins. Not with gods, not with war, but with a man standing between who he was and what his son might become. For a while, the cage holds. Routine replaces conquest. Silence replaces war. Kratos believes that if the monster stays contained, if it's never seen, the cycle might finally end. But then, someone knocks. The stranger doesn't arrive like the gods of Olympus. There's no army, no prophecy, no spectacle. Just a man at the door, persistent, unafraid, and more importantly, unimpressed. And that's what makes him so dangerous. Baldur doesn't threaten Kratos' pride, he doesn't challenge his past, he threatens the fragile balance Kratos has built. Kratos tries to avoid the fight, and that matters. Kratos isn't looking for violence, he's trying to contain it. But some threats don't respect distance. When the fight becomes unavoidable, Kratos does what a protector must do. He fights back. Not blindly, not in fury, deliberately. Every strike is controlled, every movement chosen, every ounce of force used only when necessary. Kratos is not wrong here. Force is sometimes required. Strength is sometimes the only answer. The threat is stopped, his family is safe. But force, even when justified, is never silent. Because fights don't just end danger, they teach something, and Atreus sees everything. He sees that the cage works, but only up to a point. Kratos believes he can show strength without passing on his violent past, but he doesn't get to choose the lesson, only the action. What Atreus learns isn't that violence is evil. He learns that violence works, that when the rules fail, force answers, that restraint has a breaking point, that monsters are acceptable when the reason feels right. Kratos wins the fight, but winning isn't the same as resolution, because for the first time, rage isn't used in isolation. It's used in front of a witness. Kratos doesn't see the cost yet. He believes the cage still holds because he never fully opened it. But cages don't fail because they're weak. They fail because they have doors, and doors get used. When Atreus asks questions afterward, about strength, about fighting, about what his father did, Kratos answers with silence. The same silence he's been using to keep himself contained. Kratos believes restraint will protect his son, and he's not wrong. The cage didn't fail because Kratos lacked strength. It failed because strength, by itself, can't teach when to stop. Kratos was right to fight. He was wrong to believe the fight could be consequence-free. And that realization, that strength must be paired with something more, pushes him toward the hardest truth of all. That protecting a child isn't about stopping the threat in front of you. It's about shaping who they become afterward. If you're listening to this and feeling the tension in that moment, between protecting the people you love and worrying about what they're teaching them, that's the work we do here. The show isn't about pretending that monsters don't exist. It's about learning how to live with it without letting it ruin your life. If that's a conversation you want to keep having, subscribe to Disassembled Heroes and Villains. Because these stories aren't really about gods or monsters. They're about the parts of ourselves we're responsible for passing on. You're not alone in this. And if this episode hit home, you're in the right place. Silence failed. The cage failed. And rage, left unchecked, nearly took everything with it. So Kratos is forced to face the question he's been avoiding the entire time. If hiding the monster doesn't work, what does? The turning point in Kratos' journey doesn't come during a victory. It comes in a moment of dread. He realizes that protecting Atreus doesn't just mean surviving the next fight. It means preparing his son for a world where fights are inevitable. And for the first time, Kratos understands the real problem. The monster isn't his anger. The monster is pretending it isn't there. So when Kratos returns for the Blades of Chaos, it isn't a relapse. It's an admission. He doesn't retrieve them because he wants to feel powerful again. He retrieves them because hiding from who he is has stopped working. This is the moment many people misread. They think Kratos is choosing violence again, but that's not what's happening. He's choosing responsibility. When he says, "I do not do this for you," he isn't rejecting his son. He's telling the truth. He does it because Atreus needs a father who understands his own darkness well enough to control it, not a man pretending that darkness doesn't exist. This is where Kratos becomes recognizable to the everyday man. Not softer, not safer, but honest. For most men, especially fathers, that's the hardest shift of all, because many of us were taught the same two lies. Either you're strong or you're gentle. Either you fight or you're failing. Kratos shows us a third option. You can be capable of violence, and disciplined enough not to lead with it. You can be dangerous and still be trustworthy. You can fight when necessary and still teach restraint afterward. That's the lesson Atreus actually needs. Not that violence is evil, but that strength requires explanation. Because children don't just inherit our actions, they inherit the reasons we give, or refuse to give, for them. Kratos begins to change not when he stops fighting, but when he starts speaking. He explains, he warns. That matters. Because silence teaches too. It teaches that emotions are dangerous, that power shouldn't be questioned, that anger has no owner. Kratos finally understands that guidance isn't weakness, it's containment. It's building a cage strong enough to hold the monster that lives inside every man. Because this isn't just a myth about gods and monsters, it's a mirror to us all. Modern men aren't struggling because they're too angry. They're struggling because no one ever taught them what to do with anger once it stopped being useful. Many of us learned to survive early, to endure, to push forward. But survival skills don't automatically become leadership skills. And fatherhood exposes that gap brutally. You start asking questions like, When do I step in? When do I let them struggle? When does protection become control? What am I modeling when I raise my voice? What lesson survives after the moment passes? Kratos doesn't give us perfect answers, because he isn't a perfect man. What he gives us is something better, a framework. Strength isn't about pretending the monster doesn't exist. It's about knowing exactly where it is, keeping it on a leash. Not chained, not buried, leashed. Because a leashed monster can guard a home, an unacknowledged one burns it down. Kratos becomes a better father not by erasing his past, but by taking ownership of it. He doesn't say, "I was wrong to be angry." His actions show, "I was wrong to let anger decide everything." That distinction matters, especially for men raising sons, especially for men who know what they're capable of when pushed, especially for men who want to pass down strength and the wisdom to use it well. Kratos doesn't become peaceful, he becomes integrated, and that work is hard. Not becoming harmless, becoming deliberate. Because the goal was never to kill the monster. The goal was to make sure it answers to the right master. Kratos doesn't win by forgetting his past. He wins by choosing what he's willing to carry. The monster never leaves him. It never disappears. It never gets easier to manage. But the burden of the monster isn't rage. Burden is responsibility. Responsibility to know yourself. Responsibility to explain your strength. Responsibility to make sure what you pass down is more than instinct. Because every man carries something dangerous. Not every man learns how to carry it well. Kratos doesn't teach us how to be harmless. He teaches us how to be accountable. And that might be the hardest kind of strength there is. This has been Disassembled Heroes and Villains. And this was the story of Kratos. Not the god who destroyed worlds, but the man who chose to end the war inside his home. Thanks for watching. Stay deliberate, stay accountable, and as always, stay handsome.